All right, cool. Okay, so last week, Bonita went through the process of adapting a design based on a 12-column grid and showing some of the possibilities that you can create with this sort of structure. What we're going to look at today is taking what she has done and implementing it in HTML and CSS. I'm not going to be using any framework, so there's not going to be any React or Bootstrap or Tailwind or anything like that. I'm just going to be doing raw CSS to show you how the nuts and bolts work. So what I've done already, I'll send the GitHub link to the group. So if I can find the chat now. View. Having a Zoom moment here. View. No, that was for Chrome. Here we go, chat. Right. Okay, so this is the GitHub link for the repo we're going to be working on today. And what I did to set up was just go to GitHub and create a new public repository, give it a sensible name, in this case, Noroff demo. And then I created a README file and used GitHub Desktop to download, clone that repository, and then open it in VS Code. So to begin with, I didn't have any files. I created my own index.html file, and I created my own CSS file. And if we look, if I can move this UI, here we go. If we look here, we can see the history of commits. I've done 11 over about 4 hours. And all of this is just sort of setting up the basic HTML, the basic CSS. I haven't gone through and added any sort of complicated layout yet. So if we exit full screen. Okay, so I'll show you how far I have got this project to before we start adding grid layers and layout. So what I've tried to do is visually copy the design that's set out here. You'll see that there's a few differences. It's not necessarily one-to-one at this point. That's the whole point of this class today. As we scroll down, you can see the columns sort of roughly lining up with each other in terms of vertical positioning, but they're not positioned at all on the x-axis yet. So we keep going, and we have this quite complicated arrangement here, which is going to require a bit of like overlaying items and mixing grid columns. At the moment, this stuff is all just listed one after another without any special styling. I did do a bit of styling for this text overlay. If anyone's interested, I will go through that code in a second. And then created the round graphic here. Again, I'll touch on the code for that in one moment. And then lastly, at the bottom, we have these two columns. It's the larger top two text sections here. And then we have three smaller columns that all contain the same text. So we have the same text repeated 3 times, all stacked up on top of each other. And then just a blank footer with the theme, the sort of main theme color. So this did take a couple of hours. It's mostly sort of detail work. I've been concentrating on, looking at this element and recreating it here. The font sizes are not 100% spot on. That's something that can be fine-tuned later on in the process. So what I'll do is just run through the HTML and explain why I made the decisions I made about which tags to use and how to group tags together. And then once I've done that, we'll do the same thing with the CSS file. And then once we're done with that, we can start adding some content and adding some layout to this. So just check the chat. Okay, can everyone see this text big enough? I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. It looks pretty big to me, but I'm not sure how it's coming through on your screen. Someone in the chat. Okay, cool. All right, so the first sort of section of a style sheet is usually pretty similar. The first thing I'm doing is importing the Google font Inter, importing normal and bold weights. And then the next step I like to do is to set important values as root level CSS variables so that we can actually refer to this name later on instead of having to type out 0.5 rem or these nice color codes here. So this stuff is sort of like a chance to create your color palette or your theme, and there's no cost to this, so you can have as many of these variables as you like. It does get a bit confusing if you have hundreds of them, but 10 or 15 is generally fine. So next we have browser resets, and these are designed to subtly change the default behavior of the browser to make life a little bit easier in terms of styling. So the main thing here is box sizing, which we want to set, generally speaking, to border box to avoid some funky issues with the default content box sizing model. We have a big font stack here, which is just about covering every operating system, all of their default fonts, and okay, not understanding a word. All right, I'm trying to go quickly, but that's fine. I can slow down. I'm trying to fit everything into half an hour, so I will go a little bit slower. Thanks for that. Right, so all I'm doing in this section of the style sheet is saying I want things to behave using border box, which is it. I'm not going to get into what border box means. I'm just referring to it quickly. If you want to look into it, it's quite interesting. In terms of the variables that I mentioned up here, I've set the background of the body to the variable light, which is the color white, and the color of the text to the variable dark, which is the color black. So this just means if in future I want to change white and say, call it yellow, everything that's referring to this will change to yellow all at the same time without me having to go through the code and change it in every single place. Is it a plugin that tells you when you added the styles in the gray font? This text here saying me an hour ago, this is a plugin called Git Lens. It is just telling me when this code was last changed. It doesn't actually describe the code itself. It's just telling me that the last time I touched this code was when I made this commit, and we will go through commits in just a second. So we have typography, which is going to be all your headings, H1, H2, H3, and so on, as well as paragraph styles. And I'm not really doing too much here. I'm sort of changing the way that the margins work, but I'm setting a few custom font sizes, but that's all I'm doing here. I'm not changing colors. I'm not giving any padding or this is just like these sizes are corresponding to the sizes of each text item in the design. So I'll be looking at the design, it says 64 pixels, and I make a conversion into the unit I'm using, but I could easily just say 64 pixels if I wanted to. And that's setting the sizes for these text sections. So if I just take this down to 1.5 and refresh, you'll see it's much smaller. And all of these sizes are set sort of in proportion. So if this one's bigger, this one needs to be smaller, and this one's smaller still. And that is what I'm doing when I'm setting these values up. Next, I like to start at the top of the document and work my way down as much as possible. So the first thing you're going to be styling is the header, which if we go into DevTools, we can see is this sort of thin strip across the top containing the navigation. And the header is 100% width. It has an absolute position. And that just means that it can be, the next thing underneath it can sort of overlap. So we don't want a white strip at the top of this image. And if I just remove the style to make it position static, you can see we can't see the header because it's white on white, and we don't need that extra white space. So by setting position absolute, we are solving that problem for ourselves. The only other thing really to note here is that I've set a Z index of 10, which means that nothing else it's going to be at the forefront, sort of, it's going to be closest to the camera, if that makes sense. Nothing else will be able to hide it by going over the top of it. After the header, we have some navigation styles. So these are styling these top navigation items here. And if I remove all of this content, you can see that it looks like a pretty normal unordered list of links. Doesn't look that great. And so with quite a small amount of styling, I'm able to get those looking much closer to the design, which we have here. We can zoom in. In fact, it's not that close to the design because the design has these items spaced out much more widely than I have spaced these out. We can perhaps fix that just now. Okay, it's going to take a while to go through the whole style sheet, but we're about a third of the way through, so I think we're doing okay. This is actually doing nothing right now, so we can ignore it. The footer, I've just said for it to sort of fill the empty space with a bit of color for now, because we don't have any content in there. And then a few sort of common sense styles. This image style is very, very useful because often images will sort of blow up. If you have a 4,000 pixel wide image and you throw it straight into an HTML document, it's going to overflow the width of the page, and you'll have a vertical scroll bar along the bottom, which is bad. We don't want that ever, or in very rare cases we like that, but almost never, because it's awful for a mobile user. So this just means that images will never get too big and they'll never sort of break the document. We have some other general styles for, this is actually, I'm going to skip past this because it's not relevant to the lesson. The container is very important. And I'm going to change this to 1200 pixels just to make it make sense a little bit more. The purpose of a container is when we're looking at something on a very, very large screen, we want to keep the content centered in the page, even if it's not literally centered in the page like this text is. So this text is meant to be in dead center. However, some of the items need to be arranged into columns. And if we allow all of this white space on either side of the page to be used up, it's going to make everything very long and thin and not looking very good. And I can show you the effect of that just by removing the styles for the container. And suddenly we see this is sort of cramped up in the corner, and these titles are too long, and the text is overflowing here, and everything just looks sort of wrong and broken without this one special class. So this is very important. It doesn't require a lot of code. You're just saying the maximum width that you want to allow content to extend to. And this you can leave out if you want, but margin auto will make sure that that column will always stay centered nicely in the middle of the page. So that's a very common concept. It's included in Bootstrap and lots of other CSS frameworks. And it's kind of just a fundamental building block of creating familiar layouts that are nice to read. The reason they exist is that it becomes harder to read a section of text the longer the line is. There's a sort of magic size of what your eye likes to read one sentence before going down to the next sentence. So a container is sort of how we regulate that behavior, considering that my screen size could be anything like this. So since we don't know exactly what the screen size is going to be, we have to make some common sense judgments on the behalf of the user. And one of those is setting a maximum width for content. Okay, where are we here? We've gone past container, text center. That's just to align text. A few button styles. If you look down here, there's a button with a very minor animation. And all of this button code is here. And if we remove the button code, we can see that the link doesn't look like anything. So these styles turn it into this nice clickable button. And that's really just sort of setting a border and a background color and a border radius. Read more text, the read more styles are for these links here and this link in the main banner. So that's just text decoration. And then we have the actual banner CSS itself. There's quite a lot of it because there are some interesting challenges here. So for example, this, this round banner here, the image itself is round. So if we look at the image, it's got a transparent background and the image has been cropped round by Adobe already. However, the banner that contains that image is also round. So if I delete the image, you'll see that it still maintains the same shape. That is actually so that you can drop a square image into this, this slot here, and it will render it as a round image. So that's just a sort of a nice little technique for creating a bit of fluid geometry rather than rectangular geometry in your page. When it comes to this banner here, what I've done is I have a parent element, and the parent element also contains an image, and it also contains some text. And using position absolute instead of static, if I go static, it's going to look very different. That's what it looks like if we're static. And if I say absolute, then we can position the text down in the bottom corner. We're not sort of bound by the normal flow of the page. We've said we want to do something slightly different, put it in the bottom left corner. Make this bigger slightly. Okay, so the reason I didn't do this as part of the tutorial is that I would like to show you how we now arrange these content items into, so for example, this bottom section, if we look at the design, it is arranged into 2 large columns and then 3 smaller columns with this circle hanging off the edge. So exactly how we go about doing this is what the focus of the class is going to be on. We're already 20 minutes of the way through. So I suppose I should get to it and start down here. Actually, no, I'm going to start at the top because that's more fun. Okay, so that was as quick an overview of this project I can do. I'm sure there are lots of questions and I'll try and answer some of those a little bit later on. In terms of affecting the layout here, the first thing we notice if we're comparing the design to, I'm going to make this full screen for a second. And we can hide the grid, hide layout grid. So the first thing you can see is that this text in the center is aligned vertically, and it's actually aligned vertically along with this Explore More button. This is always something that is been quite tricky in CSS. It's caused a lot of pain and anguish in the past. However, we now have tools that make this very, very easy. So in this case, we have an opportunity to fix this content. We have this as the sort of group that contains the title, and it also contains the button, the link, and it lives inside this container element. So how do we make this vertically aligned? We can go to the style sheet, create some space here, and we're going to create a class called Flex. Display Flex, and we're going to put that new class onto the container. Now nothing has happened, but we can see here container Flex, and it's marked on Chrome DevTools as a Flex item. So we need to do more than that. We need to say Flex justify, or sorry, not justify, align items center. And this is just a class I'm creating. That's not it can be called anything. And here we have align items center. And it's a pretty well-named class because there's nothing else that's going to be going on here. It does what it says on the tin, and that's generally the way we want our classes to be. So now we can see that our content area is centered nicely in the vertical space of the main banner. And if I come in here and I click on this class, element classes button, and toggle off align item center, you can see the effect of this one class. And all it's saying is use all of the available height of the element and position this child element directly in the center. We can also do the same thing with justify and say justify content center. Thank you, Copilot. If anyone's wondering how code is magically appearing on my screen, you're not allowed to know if you don't know. It's a secret. I'm part of a testing program for some very scary AI that does my job for me. So now we have added that other class, and if we go back to the same element as before and add this justify content center, now we can see that not only is the content vertically centered, but it's also centered in the middle of the space as well. And of course, we can do just about anything we want here. So we can say justify content, and we can say, well, start and end is really, it's really the only thing we're interested in. But this gives you a tool to position any content at any position within its parent. As long as the parent has enough space, you can dictate where each item is going to be sitting on the page. So I actually want to get rid of that last class because it doesn't match the design. It's if we look at the design, it is centered on the left edge of the container. And then, sorry, it's aligned on the left edge of the container and centered in the middle of the banner. And so that is what we have here. And if we make it larger, you can see it's kind of looks similar to the design, depending on the screen size. Okay. For these two, we get a freebie for these two paragraphs because they are, if we turn the grid back on, you'll see that these two text items take up 100% of the grid. They take up 12 columns. That is the default behavior of an item in HTML. So you don't actually have to instruct, you don't have to write a style in order to get an item to take up 100%. It sort of wants to do that already. So there's not much code here apart from setting the correct font weight, this is actually regular rather than bold, and the size, which is obviously 3 different sizes here. But our last paragraph in this section, it is half width, i.e. taking up 6 columns. If we go back here, we see that is not the case in our web page. So how do we do that? This here, the highlighted line, this is this line. So you have H2, H3, H2, H3, and then you have a paragraph. So we're going to add a new container, and it's going to be Flex, same class we just created. Into this container, we're going to put the p tag that we just cut and pasted. And if we look, nothing changes. It's exactly the same. Now we can add on here a class, we can call it column or column half. Technically, that's not the correct name because that would mean that it's taking up half of one column. So let's call this column 6 for now, or 6 columns. It's not a great name either, but we'll change this eventually. 6 columns. That's how much space we want it to take up in the design. So down here, we can say 6 columns. And now we have a slightly, this is arguably the most difficult part of interpreting a design into web, is that unless you use CSS Grid, which I'm intentionally not using for this lesson, because I think it's quite an advanced technique, it's better to handle it later on in the course. Instead of using CSS Grid, we're going to sort of make a mental calculation of how to represent 6 columns or 50% of the available width using Flex. And in this case, 50% is the relevant part to us. So we want to say Flex 0, 0, 50%. That means that any item that has this class will take up 50% of its parent's width. And we could say 3 columns, and that would be, thank you. No, that's correct, obviously, because Copilot is telling me, so I would be wrong to assume Copilot is incorrect. And this, we can go through this process and create lots and lots of these classes and then add them to the elements to determine their size. So if we go back here, we now see our text is taking up less than 50% because actually no, it is 50%. It's this image that's throwing me off. So it's taking up 50% of the space, but it is on the wrong side of the page. So if we look at the design, it should be over this side, but it naturally wants to go to the left because we read from left to right. So that's the default direction for the browser. So in order to fix this, we're going to say justify content end. And in our style sheets, we can just copy this style we made earlier and change this value to end and change this to end. And now the text is 50% and it's on the correct right side of the screen. Just by making a calculation based on how much space do we have, what is the percentage of that space we need, and the answer is 50%. This will stay at 50% even if we reduce the screen size to the point where it will probably look pretty stupid, like a really long list. And we might not want that to be the case. So there are a few things we can do to fix that. Let's say that we want it to be 100% width after, say, 500 pixels. So I'm just changing the pixel width of the screen here and playing around. And I've decided that 500 pixels is where I want to give this section of text the full width. The way I do that is I say media, max width, 500 pixels, and then open a block, and Copilot helpfully knows what I want to do here. We're changing the 50% to 100%, and we're only doing this for screens that have a width of less than 500 pixels. So it's going to be a lot of smaller mobile devices will be caught in that bracket. And now if we go below 500, this rule kicks in and the flex amount changes to 100%. So whenever you're dealing with something like Bootstrap Grid, it will be using the same sort of mechanisms underneath. And that's why I didn't start this project with Bootstrap, because you can actually sort of build up your own, excuse me, you can build up your own mini framework of useful styles, and you can reuse those across projects. And that's much better when you're starting off than just going straight to Bootstrap and saying, okay, I want this, this, and this, because it is very quick and easy. That's what a framework is for. It's meant to make our life easier. It's not a cheat code. It's a normal part of development. However, having your hands on the code directly will always give you an advantage. And all we're doing here is sort of roughly mocking up the way that the Bootstrap grid system actually works underneath the hood. It's a lot more complicated because it allows for lots of different options that would take me a long time to type out in this session. And we haven't touched on arranging the images into this, sorry. We haven't touched on arranging the images into this complex arrangement here, but I don't think we're going to have time for that because that will take me at least 15 minutes. So we might have to go to questions now and pick up this design process or this design implementation process in the next session. So if anyone's got any burning questions, I'll try and answer some now. No one? What do you reckon on time, MJ? Shall I keep going or shall I call it?
I'd say keep going. If everyone else is happy with that.
Okay, I'll keep going, and if you want to drop off, that's up to you. So we'll try and do something a little bit more sophisticated with with these images now. So it's this image here, it's this link, this text section, and then this image. They're all arranged into a sort of square grid pattern. And it's not exactly clear from looking at this how they're going to sit together. They're going to need a little bit of adjustment. But essentially, we have column A with the hands. Column B is mostly white space with the explore hour. Column C is a smaller one with a text block, and column D is larger. So we can see that this image is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of 12. A nice, easy thing to calculate that. So if we find this element in the HTML, it is this one. Explore our history. Yeah, so it's this image. So we want to give the flex class to the container again. I'm going to create a new one called flex wrap. And flex wrap allows items to sort of break onto multiple lines. So if you don't have flex wrap and you have lots of items, they'll end up sort of like this, squeezed onto the same line without the ability to wrap underneath. So already we can see just by applying just by applying this one flex style, we've changed the direction that the content is rendering in. It's currently rendering in a sort of vertical way. And as soon as we add flex, it's now trying to push everything onto the same line. And that's just the default behavior. So in order to instruct the child items how big they should be, we're going to create a few classes, and this is going to be 7 columns for the image, because we can see it's taking up more than half. Is that right? 7 or 8? It is 7 columns, but it's offset by 1 column. So it is actually a 6 column, and it's shifted by 1. So we're actually going to call this 6. And then this is going to be the remaining 4 columns. That's going to contain the link. Space these out a little bit to make it a bit easier to read. This next one is 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, again offset. Take all of this. And what I'm doing here, just in case anyone's confused, is cutting with Command X on a Mac, or Control X, I believe, on Windows. Cutting and pasting instead of copying and pasting, just because it sort of makes it's one fewer click, and that's very important if you're a developer. Fewer clicks is always better. So we have 6 columns, 4 columns, 4 columns, and the last one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it's actually extending off to the edge of the screen. So this one's going to be a special case here. We can call it 7 columns just for now. And if anyone is wondering exactly what is happening here, this is called emit. It is a way to write HTML very quickly. Okay, so 7 columns. I'm going to say this is a column special. Special column might make more sense. Special column. Okay, so we have flex and we have flex wrap, which we haven't actually defined yet. I'm going to put this here underneath flex wrap, and it's flex wrap. Because something don't repeat yourself. And then we also need to add the extra columns. So we already have 3 columns here. Makes sense to put them in order. 1 column is going to be pretty obvious. I think Copilot is maybe gone to sleep now. Wait, what am I doing here? This is wrong. 1 column is 1/12. In case you're like me, really bad at maths, you can actually just get the use calc to do these things for you, but I shan't do that. What's 1/12 as a percentage? I really am. Who's good at maths? I'm just looking at the comments here. Is it better practice to name divs after column size instead of context? The answer is to do both. So if I go back to the HTML, if the only thing my div is trying to achieve is layout, like the only purpose of this div is just to create the 6 column layout, then it only makes sense to call it something relating to columns. You can see here, this one is called content. It has an ID of plants. It has a data title of plants. So that's a bit more sort of semantic, and that's telling us more about what the purpose of the element is. But often we do have these sort of structural or utility classes that they're less descriptive of the content and they're more descriptive of the layout. So the answer is you use both. The problem with trying to create layout was, so say we were saying, calling this like plant image. And we're going to give plant image some flex styles. We're probably going to want to use the exact same flex styles again somewhere else. If we have a very long document, or if we have a whole web page, the chances are that we're going to need to use this again. And it wouldn't really make sense to call something else plant image if it doesn't contain a plant image. So we could say plant image 6 columns, and have both. And that's the best of both worlds, is to have something descriptive and also have something utilitarian. And the flex stuff should usually stay with 6 columns here. But if you're just doing like a one-off document and you know you're not going to be repeating this stuff, it's fine to put that stuff under plant image. But there's nothing about the class name plant image that tells you that it's going to be 6 columns. So I've stalled nicely so that someone else can do my maths for me. 8.3 sounds very correct. That's going to be, okay. We don't actually need all of these. We just need 4, 6, 4, 7. It's going to be like 8.3 times 3 to the 3 recurring. I mean, it's okay. I actually need to get a calculator because my brain doesn't work like this. This is why I'm a front-end developer, not a back-end developer, by the way. 33.2, that'll do. Is that right? Now that's okay. I'm very confused already. This is actually not like, we very rarely define these column styles ourselves. 3 columns should be 24.9. That sounds good. Okay, 4, 6, and then 7. And that must be what, 58.3? Okay. So now we do have the beginnings of the layout we want. The about us and this yellow text is more or less positioned correctly. Everything is 1 column too far to the left at the moment. So we can fix all of those in one go. So we have our container, flex wrap, and we could add a class to every single item, or we could just add a class here, and we're going to say that this is actually an 11 column grid rather than a 12 column grid. It's again not necessarily the best name for it, but 11 column grid. And the only thing we're going to do to deny that column, am I going to make a problem here? I am. Excuse me quickly. I need to move these flex classes off the container, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble in a second. So all I'm doing is moving all of this content into a new child so that the container classes don't start to mess with the flex classes. So now we have our container, and underneath it, we just have all of our flex styles. And 11 column grid is going to have padding left of 8.33%, removing effectively, removing that first column by filling it with padding. So now if we look at this element, which is our flex container, this first column is taken up in green by padding. And then we have our 6 column plant image. We have our 4 column explore history button. And then below we have our 4 column about us section and our 7 column special, which we haven't extended to the edge of the screen yet. So that is much closer. And if we play around with the screen size, it should more or less adjust as we start to deny the viewport storage. It should be wrapping, but it's not going to wrap. Did I write the flex wrap class? Yeah, flex wrap. Okay, that's on. Flex wrap. It's probably these that are the issue. Let's try a minimum width. There we go. So the idea is that flex wrap will allow this item to be moved underneath when there's no more space for it. And I've just said that 500 pixels is the minimum width that this thing can have. So as soon as it hits that minimum width, it will wrap underneath. And we can do that for all of these items separately and define this separately so they only wrap at the exact moment they need to based on how much content is here. And this is like a sort of a different approach to using media queries to adjust the layout for small screens. Here, you're actually using the size of the viewport to instruct the arrangement, and it's done by the browser automatically. And I'll do it to these as well. Say 4 columns will give 400 pixels, and 3 columns will give 300 pixels, and so on, just as a sort of very rough idea of how this would work. And now we should see a bit more. This one, 7 columns. We'll say 600. So we've positioned the content on a grid when we have enough space. When we don't have enough space, it automatically breaks out of this arrangement in a way that is going to work on a mobile device. And this is just about using Flexbox properly. You don't really have to use Flexbox and a lot of media queries together unless something's gone wrong with your flex wrapping. There are a few more things here visually that are not correct. So if we look at the design, we'll see that the explore our history link should be much further down in this element. The about us should have a lot more space. It should actually be lined up with the plant a tree should be lined up with the word network here. And to do this, we can use the same styles that we've already created. So this one, the about us section, we're going to say flex, and we're going to say align item center. Okay, that's better, but it's not correct. So we need align items end. I think we need to add that one. Okay, so now the plant a tree it's not perfectly in line because this content block has padding, but it's close enough for now. We also have a bit of overflow here, which ideally we'd add a bit of a gap between these. For now, we can just say pad right, and that creates a little bit of breathing room between the about us and the yellow text. And if I find that pad right class here, it is just a very simple class that says padding right, and then I have one of my variables here, which is a fixed amount. Sorry, a fixed amount of space that's going to be used. So anytime you need to add padding, it will always be adding the same amount of padding, which creates a nicer sort of visual balance. Your eye picks up different gaps very easily, so it's good to keep these all the same. And just to finish off this section, we will look at the overlap. How do we create that sort of overlap in CSS? It can be pretty difficult because we have to sort of do something that is a little bit naughty in CSS land, which is break something out of its natural position using position relative or position absolute. And we want to do that to the whole. We don't want to just do this to the image 10. So we're not just interested in moving the image on its own. We have to move the whole group. So we're going to get rid of these for now. And the banner is already position relative. We already have a special class called banner overlay yellow. So I think that is appropriate place to go and overlay yellow. And here we want to hoist the content up by about that much, which I'm going to take a rough guess at instead of measuring, because that's what I do. I'm going to say that it is top minus 5 REM. How does that look? Not enough. Minus 7. This will cause trouble because when we're wrapping the content around, we're now overlapping the button instead of the image. So this is why I said that it was a little bit naughty to do this, because it is not what the browser wants you to be doing. It wants the browser wants everything to be laid out in a perfect, nice grid where nothing is overlapping each other and everything is a box. But designers have other ideas, so we have to keep up with those. There's probably a clever way of fixing that problem, but I don't think I have the time to write a little solution here. It'd probably involve a media query just to adjust this top minus, what was it, top minus 7. Did I not put this here? Okay, top minus 7 REM. And we could say, when does it become a problem? It becomes a problem at 1,000 and 1,120 pixels or so. So we can say max width 1,120 pixels. We're just going to say copy this and delete some of the things we're not interested in. Say top 0. So now hopefully when we come in here, we avoid that problem of overlapping the button with our image. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. As you can see, there's still more to be done down here with this layout, but we can get to that in another time at the beginning of the next session maybe, and then move on to using CSS Grid to achieve the exact same thing a different way. So this has been your sort of introduction to taking a design and trying to interpret it in a way that's not necessarily like one-to-one. It's not always the case that you can just hit the export button on XD and have your code come through perfectly, because the job of a XD designer is different to the job of a front-end developer. The designer is meant to conceptualize, and the front-end developer is meant to execute. How we execute things is very different to how we conceptualize them. And that bridge is one of the most important skills you can have in this industry, because there's a lot of people who they know their code very well, they know their programming, that they can't look at a design and think, come up with a strategy of how to lay that out on the page. In reality, if someone gave me this brief and told me to do this in a production context, I wouldn't be writing my style sheet from scratch. I would be using an existing CSS framework and adapting it. The main reason for that is that if I need to pass my project on to a colleague or to a different team in a different company, it's much easier for them to read the documentation for a CSS framework, know what they're dealing with, and then pick it up from there. Whereas if I've written all of the code myself from scratch, they have the unfortunate task of either trusting that I did it well or trying to get inside my head and understand my psychology and why I chose to name this X and Y and Z. And that is something that is quite it's not very courteous to assume of another person you don't know, let me put it that way. But in terms of a learning experience, it's much better to jump in and start working with the code and playing around with it, changing things, breaking things. One thing that I haven't been doing as I've been working is committing my work, which I usually do very often. And you can see here the changes I've made during this session. I've mostly been adding these flex styles and a couple of media queries here and there. So now that we're done with the session, I'm going to commit the work, and I'm going to say adds flex classes for the style sheet. So that is enough. I'm going to push the work and go back to GitHub and refresh. There we go. The repository is up to date. So if you clone the repository now, or if you've already cloned it and you update the repository, you will see all of the code that we've been working on. And you can even look through the history of how I got up to this point if you want to dig in further. But that is it from me for today. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, you can send them in the chat box now. All right. Silence is golden. Okay, thanks. And yeah, we'll see you next week for Martin's session. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be covering in that session, but you'll be made aware of it soon.
All right. Well, thanks a lot there, Oliver. Thanks for taking us through that. And I'll share the video with everyone to have another look at later. Cheers.